My name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson. I will be your host. And as you all know, we're having a superb speaker today, Ron Barber. Many of you are familiar with Ron. He is a Democrat, and he served as the congressman for Tucson from 2012 to 2015. And today, Ron is heading a cross-partisan initiative, which is the Democracy Resilience Network. And this is designed to push back on election disinformation and violence targeting voters at the polls. Ron says our democracy is in serious danger. I couldn't agree more. We need these networks to restore trust and confidence in our elections. So Ron is the co-leader of the Arizona network. The network nationwide is composed of 300 faith leaders, business leaders, and directors of community nonprofits. And with that, Ron, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Larry. It's great to be with you all. And I appreciate the invitation to share some information with you about the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network. And I think just a little bit of background, and then we've got a PowerPoint to show you information about what we're trying to do. Back in December of last year, I was finishing my year with Senator Kelly as the Southern Arizona director. I had told Mark when he called me in 2020 after he won the election that I was retiring. And he said, well, not yet. Why don't you help me with the first year setting up the Southern Arizona offices and that kind of thing. So I agreed to do that. Then in December, I actually did submit my retirement papers and on the way to being a man of leisure. Not so fast. I got a call just a couple of weeks later from the Carter Center. This is the center that is founded decades ago by Rosalind and Jimmy Carter, President Carter. And they've done, as you know, a lot of really great work across the world, particularly in helping people with vaccinations to control diseases, food programs. And relevant to this particular presentation has been the Carter Center's work on trying to help emerging democracies to get established and to work effectively. So in 2020, the Carter Center and the president, former president, I should say, Carter, decided that because of what was happening in our country, they needed to bring their democracy resilience work home to America. And so that was what was launched early this year by the Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia. The idea behind it is that we will set up networks that will be in existence through the 2024 election. And we have started with 4 states, and then we will be expanding next year in preparation for the 24 election. The 4 states include Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. So Larry, do you want to put up the slides again? And I'll walk everyone through that. So here we are, the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network. My co-lead is Don Henninger. Don is a Republican from Maricopa County. I might add a moderate Republican. They still exist, I found out. And Don is a former newspaper guy. He is the managing editor of the Arizona Republic. He also was the editor of the Phoenix Gazette. Currently, he's working on community planning and advocacy in his community. Don is a great partner. He is a very reasonable guy. We see eye to eye on what we're trying to do here with this network. So next slide, please. So we call it cross-partisan, nonpartisan. Cross-partisan really is all-inclusive of every party, and we do have political operatives from across the political spectrum. Our goals are to make sure that threats of violence, acts of violence, statements that are outrageous, and particularly the concern that we all have about the erosion of our democratic norms, our job is to push back on all of that, to support fair, secure, and safe elections in the 4 states, including ours here. As Larry said, our democracy is in serious danger. I think we would probably all agree on this. And we hope that these networks will help restore trust and confidence in our elections. And we believe, and polling would support this, that the vast majority of Americans share these concerns. And we believe we'll respond favorably if we find the right messenger. We've learned from polling and focus groups that the message is important. But I think you would probably all agree that equally important, maybe even more important, is who the messenger is. So we have looked for trusted messengers, and we've found almost 200 of them who are willing to work with us to stand up for accuracy and truth and to push back on election deniers and threats, all the things that they have been doing and certainly did in 2020 and are continuing to do in Arizona. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're made up of faith leaders, business leaders. We have some former elected officials. We have current candidates and elected officials. And then we have the executive directors of nonprofits that are working on planning, research, and advocacy, not one that provide direct services. And they agree with us that we have to change the way in which political discourse happens in our state and country. So we are advocating for candidates. By the way, I should say that we're not endorsing any candidates. We're not endorsing any policies, but we are asking candidates to be guided by 5 basic principles during the campaign. And next slide, please. So the 5 principles, I mean, when you read them, you'll think, oh gosh, motherhood and apple pie, how can anyone disagree with that? But I think we all know that some people just don't agree with what we're asking them to do. We want an honest process where candidates and people who win or lose the election cooperate with election officials. They follow the rules and they refrain from propagating falsehoods about the electoral process. It's a huge issue. Arizona, I'm sad to say, is ground zero for a lot of this work. Next slide, please, Larry. We ask that candidates have a civil campaign. Some of you will know that after the shooting back in 2011, my wife and my kids and I formed what we called the Fund for Civility, Respect, and Understanding. The rhetoric in that time, and that's almost 11 years ago now, was pretty harsh and pretty uncivil, but not like it is today. It's worse today. And I mean, we were dealing with, at that time, with Tea Party rhetoric, but now we're dealing with something much more ominous because it includes violence, acts of violence, and threats. So we're asking in our second principle that candidates should encourage a peaceful election atmosphere, and that they should denounce any attempt to intimidate, harass, threaten, or incite violence against their opponents, supporters, and election workers. What we know about the election workers, and you've seen some articles on this, is that in 2 counties all across the state, they've been threatened and their families have been threatened. We have at least 2 counties in Arizona where the election officials have resigned. The county recorder and the elections director in Yuma and Yavapai County have resigned. And those aren't necessarily really progressive counties, particularly Yavapai. They were threatened, their families were threatened by some of the people who said, you're allowing fraud to occur in voting systems, which is not true. So those people, rather than go through another round of this, have resigned. And in many cases, counties are having a hard time recruiting both staff and volunteers who are willing to put up with that in order to do the civic duty that they've done in the past, which is support the election process. Next slide, please, Larry. So we're also, a principle that we're asking people to follow is that they should respect the security of voting, respecting voters' freedom to exercise their rights to register and vote, free from interference, obstruction, or intimidation. And this is an issue that I think Arizona, unfortunately, is getting ready to experience even more than in 2020. As an aside, I will tell you that there's an Oath Keeper group based in Yavapai County. While it's there, it is also networked across the state, and we've been reading some of their online chat and the actions that they're planning to take in the 2022 elections. They have said that they are going to be out, quote, monitoring the voters who drop off their ballots, early ballots, at either county recorder's offices or other sites around the county. They're going to be there to watch people who are bringing ballots to drop boxes. We know that the Oath Keepers have a propensity for arming themselves when they do their work in public. And we fully expect that that will be the case as they spread out across the state. They have a network that's pretty tight across all counties in Arizona. And we believe that it's not monitoring, but it really is intimidation of voters that they're all about. Next slide, please. We were encouraging political parties and others to train poll workers on the election process, the appropriate roles and behaviors, responsibilities, and obligations. And this has been an issue. The Arizona GOP has filed a lawsuit, I believe, just in Maricopa County at this point, saying that there are not enough Republican poll watchers or poll workers. I don't know if that's really true. I believe that they actually have done a great job up there, not only pushing back on the audit, as some of you may remember, but also setting up a system that is pretty well staffed and supported and protected. It's a sad story, but it's true that people need police protection. What happened in Maricopa County, you may recall, is that when the votes were being counted at the elections office, a group of militia came out, fully armed, long guns, body armor. They basically surrounded the building. They were chanting at the workers inside. They were holding signs that were threatening. And it turned out that in order to get workers in and out of that building, the police had to be there to escort them. And we believe that that was a dress rehearsal for what's likely to happen this year. And we want to make sure that we push back on that. Next slide, please. And trusted outcomes. It's just, in some ways, maybe the most controversial issue for some candidates, certainly not a lot of the candidates that I support and that probably you support. But if you don't agree with the election outcome, we're saying you can make claims in accordance with the law and acknowledge the legitimacy of outcomes. And after the results have been certified and all contestations have been decided, you either win or you lose, and you decide. You make that decision known publicly. So that's what we're trying to do. And we have a national effort to trying to bring in not only Arizona voters, Arizona elected officials and others to endorse these principles, but also, of course, the 4 states that are part of the initiative from Carter. Now, I signed on to this, even though when my family said, you're really retiring? And some people said, he's never going to retire. He'll retire when pigs fly. I have a really good friend who actually made a little gift to me. She gave me a fan that's in the shape of a pig. And my prized possession from her are socks on which pigs are flying. She was right. I didn't retire. I'm working about half-time with my colleague in Maricopa County to make this happen and to continue on and to build a even wider network for 2024. This is a race that many people say, and I agree with it, where democracy is on the ballot. And if we don't all show up at the polls, those who are deniers could prevail. And I've been following closely, maybe you have too, some of the polling information that I've seen about the top statewide candidates. Some good news and some not so good news. I just saw a report this morning of a poll in the Secretary of State's race with Fontes and Fincham. I was really worried that Fontes was not picking up steam. But this morning I saw a poll that's a credible poll for sure that said he's about 5 points up on Fincham and getting bigger. And the secretary in the governor's race, unfortunately, it looks like Kari Lake has gone ahead of Hobbs by 2 or 3 points. In the AG race, it's a tie right now, statistical tie between Chris Mays and Hamadeh. So-called honest Hamadeh, which I don't believe for a second he is. And then the other race that I was sort of involved with for a while is the Mark Kelly race against Blake Masters. Kelly continues to have a lead. It goes up and down, probably about 5 points now, which is unbelievable to me that a guy like Blake Masters would be that close. And I think what we know, and what I certainly know from my own races, is that the lead you have as a Democrat, particularly, closes as we get closer to the election day. And that's why you have to fight to the very end to make sure that people know who you are, what you stand for, and what your opponent is all about. So you can never slack off on these elections in our state, because a lot of people, even though they say they're never going to vote for someone who's extreme, a lot of people just come home to their party at the end. So that's a real concern. So anyway, our group, as I said, is nonpartisan. We're trying to recruit people from across the spectrum. We have done so. The most recent work that we've done is with the faith community. We have about 60 faith leaders, and with their help, we developed a statement from faith community leaders about the upcoming election, which we'll be pushing out through press releases and probably a press conference. What we've learned in our work with the forums, with rather the focus groups. So what we've learned is that the message is important, as I said earlier, but more important is the messenger. If the messenger is trusted, is credible, people are much more likely to respond in a positive way. And in our research, probably no secret here or no surprise, we have learned that faith leaders, in particular, as a community, as a group, are the most trusted and credible people when it comes to talking about these kinds of things. So we're happy to have a very large group of faith leaders across the spectrum. We were really having a hard time finding evangelical pastors, but we did find two, one in Phoenix and one in Tucson. Yes, they are evangelicals, but they don't believe that America was established as a Christian nation. That's not where they're coming from. Their faith is evangelical oriented, but their belief in America's democratic system is very, very powerful and very positive. They too believe that our election or our democracy has been eroded by the attacks from the former president and all of his supporters, and they want to do something about it. So I've given you a lot of information. I'd like to stop there and open it up for questions. There's plenty more to talk to you about, but I don't want to continue on until you've had a chance to ask what you would like to know.
Ron, thank you very much for all this good information and for leading up the network. Let's turn to George Beverly. George, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Ron, for your presentation. That was really nice. The question is how can they legally get these people, these oath keepers or people who do these type of, I guess, protests or standing next to buildings where polls or even dropping off ballots are, how can they legally get away with that? Don't they need some type of permission from the city to gather and protest, or do they? I mean, if it was another affiliated groups of people that were armed or in body armor, it would be all over the news. So, and they wouldn't get away with it. So how is this legally possible for these people to do that?
Well, let me start with the 2020 protest, which turned into a group of armed individuals who were surrounding the election counting office. You know, Arizona, unfortunately, is a state where you can open carry pretty much anywhere. And I certainly understand that from what happened to me and others in January of 2011 when the shooter showed up, fully armed with lots of magazines full of bullets, and killed 6 people and wounded 13 more, including Gabby and myself. So it's who we are as a state, regrettably, because I certainly believe that we don't need to have guns everywhere, visible everywhere, so people can show up and it's not against the law. What they have to obey, though, when it comes to so-called monitoring of ballots being dropped off, they have to maintain a certain amount of distance, I think it's 75 feet from that spot, so they can be across the street or whatever, and they're within the law. If they were to threaten people, then that becomes a potential law enforcement issue. I have spoken with Sheriff Nanos and also with the chief of the Tucson Police Department to warn them about the Oath Keepers plans, and they are going to be ready. They've got an interesting challenge, though. When I spoke to Sheriff Nanos, he said, we've got to be there, but we can't be there in a way that's going to intimidate voters. In other words, fully in uniform, fully armed and all of that. He's going to have a way to do this without intimidating the people who are trying to vote. So it's an issue. You know, we first learned about this Yavapai County Oath Keepers group that has the statewide network We first learned about this about a month and a half ago with a confidential report that we in the network got from the Carter Center. Princeton University has a program where they've been monitoring online extremist chat. And they reported on the Yavapai County problem, but they also have reported out on three counties in Arizona that are in the top 50, if you will. They've got data on every single county in the country, which is a phenomenal undertaking. And what they're monitoring is what's the chatter amongst these extremist groups? What are they saying? How high is the volume? How notorious are they, and all that? And unfortunately, they have found that two counties in Arizona are in the top 10. Maricopa County, I wasn't too surprised about that because of what happened in 2020. But the other one that really blew my mind was Pima County is number 8. Number 1 is Maricopa. Pima is number 8 in terms of volume and concern about violence. And then Yavapai County is number 46. So it's worrisome because obviously Pima and Maricopa, that's 70% of the voters in our state. And to know that from them that the online chatter amongst extremist groups is at a pretty high point is very concerning. So that's why we're here, partly because we want to make sure that people have fair warning about this, law enforcement officials and others. My counterpart in Maricopa County will be having a similar public forum on the 2nd of November, and he is talking to law enforcement up there. When you look at what happened in Maricopa County with the audit that we fondly call the fraudit, the real saving grace up there was the Board of Supervisors. There's a Board of Supervisors that has 4 Republicans and one Democrat, and they voted consistently, unanimously, to deny the truth of any of these allegations. And they challenged the audit, and they were very successful. Now they're all pariahs in the Republican Party, no surprise, but we do have people in the 2 largest counties that are very much aware of what can happen and will be taking the appropriate steps to have law enforcement there where it's appropriate. But you can't deny people the opportunity to show up, only if they make trouble and cause discomfort and threaten people. And they can, if they want to show up 75 feet away from the polling station or from the drop-off spot, they can actually be there to so-called monitor.
All right, we have a question from Kirk Alexander. Kirk, go right ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Larry. And good to see you, Ron. And glad to see you're looking so well.
Thanks. Not bad for an old timer, huh? What do you think?
Not too bad, yeah. So my question is, what are the 1 or 2 most important things that we as concerned citizens can be doing in the next 3 weeks up to and including, and unfortunately probably after, the November election?
Well, let me start by saying we think that the real intense activity will start on election night. Because the Trumpers have marketed this lie that if the votes aren't counted on election night, then they're fraudulent. And we all know that with early balloting and also overseas balloting from troops and others who live overseas who are American citizens, the counting may take a couple of days after the election night, unless the margin is huge, and it probably won't be in most of these cases. The election will not be called that night. And we fully expect, based upon what particularly Fincham and Lake and Hamadeh have said, that they already are saying that if they lose, the election is fraudulent. Your question, Kirk. I think there's a lot of ways that people individually can help push back. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone in the DGT network knows about our work and what we're trying to do. And they're welcome to become part of our network if they wish, and they can certainly contact me, and I'll make sure you're invited to subsequent meetings. The other thing you can do is make your voice heard publicly. And one way a normal or a regular citizen can do that is letters to the editor. I've seen some really outstanding letters to the editor. Now, not everybody reads letters to the editor. I get that. But we have to, I think, continue to have a drumbeat that's in opposition to the lies. That's one way to do it. At LD meetings, you can talk about what's going on. Information I've shared with you today about the concerns and the heightened concern around Pima and Maricopa County, and make sure that members of your legislative districts are aware of what's going on and what we're trying to do to push back. You know, in 2020, there was no outside group other than the county supervisors in Maricopa that was challenging some of this nonsense. We put the network together for that precise purpose. And what we're going to be doing on election day and days after, as well as before, of course, is putting out accurate information about how these meetings occur. It's up to all of us to share this information with our friends, our neighbors, our LDs, anyone that we can get word to, because spreading news about what's happening or likely to happen puts people makes them aware and makes them more likely to be able to defend themselves or at least push back on these just this terrible misinformation and disinformation that's out there. I think it's all of our job. And of course, turnout, you know, the best way we can defeat these people is turning out a lot of people who will vote against them, vote for the Democratic candidate in just about every case. I can't think of a case where it wouldn't be a Democratic candidate. You know, nationally, 299 people running for high office, from governor to Congress and all, 299 people are election deniers. That's a large number. I mean, if even half of those guys got elected, that would be pretty bad. In Arizona, you know, if it's the Secretary of State or the governor who get elected, you know, the Republican candidates, we're in big trouble. So we have to stop them. And the best way to do it is to spread the word how important it is for people to get out and vote. And that's why the LDs, I think, come in play a very critical role. You got to mobilize people. And what I've tried to do today is give you some facts around what's happening or likely to happen that you can share with people. I'm not BSing you. This is real stuff. This Princeton University study is alarming in the worst way possible. Just getting good information out to people so they can be aware and can push back.
Thank you, Ron. Larry, one quick follow-up, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Ron, have you or anyone you know managed to make any sort of meaningful dialogue with any of these election deniers?
The short answer is no. We had a focus group with Democrats and a focus group with Republicans about a month ago. And my colleague in Maricopa County and I both were in sort of on, but not visible. So we were monitoring what was being said, you know. And when the Democratic group had their focus group, we were texting, isn't this great? These people really know what they're talking about. They're moderate people, they're reasonable people, they're not being outrageous. So he was kind of encouraged that, you know, when we have the next meeting that same night with the Republicans, it might be similar. It wasn't. To answer to your question, what I saw that night is a group of people that I have very little to do with. And the facilitator did his best to try to get them to be rational and reasonable. I mean, had so much BS that they were putting out. They've all bought into the lie. And this represents a group of average people who said the most outrageous things. One, for example, was a woman who lives in Phoenix who said, you know, it's a dishonest election. And the facilitator said, well, how do you know that? She said, well, I've been living in a house, and this house has been rented in the past by numerous people. And do you know, I got 10 ballots in the mail. And the facilitator said, are you sure, 10 ballots? Well, she said, yeah. And then later he pushed her again, and she said, no, they actually were 12 or 10 rather ballot applications sent to everybody who had lived in that house historically, but they weren't going to be turned in. And if they were turned in, they'd be vetted and they'd be discarded. So that's the kind of nonsense that we're dealing with. And of course, these folks really, when we were asked, I mean, who do you think is trying to defend democracy? They talked about the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. It's almost impossible, Kirk, to have a conversation that it doesn't include conspiracy theories and pushback. So I wish we could say we've tried and we're successful. We just haven't been. That's why this cult that these people are bought into is so dangerous. They just don't listen to reason. They come up with the craziest ideas. Alec Jones is their hero, as is Trump. So what do you expect? They're going to buy into it because they, a lot of them feel disenfranchised. They feel like they're left out and nobody really listens to them. So they're pissed. And this is the way they respond, by buying into the lies.
Okay, we have a number of questions, beginning with Michael Bryan. Go right ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Larry. So I've been monitoring the chat for questions, and Paul Stapleton Smith wrote one there. First of all, he thanks you very much for your work, Mr. Barber. And he wants to know if you can comment on the importance of rural votes for statewide success here in Arizona, and what special challenges they face in this cycle. By that, I assume he means rural voters.
Yeah. It's a real challenge because we know that a number of elections, statewide elections in the past that were close, have been basically won or lost because rural voters didn't sign on. I've served the district that included Cochise County, one of the most conservative counties in Arizona. I never won an election in Cochise County. It wasn't even close. I think Gabby won once in the first election, never won again. Napolitano won once in all the elections she had. It's a tough community. And the redistricting in terms of the congressional delegations has made it even more conservative. It's just an example of rural thinking. When the so-called Independent Commission on Redistricting landed on the new district that is Congressional District 6, my old district, but somewhat changed, they extracted Bisbee and Douglas from Cochise County, and they put them in Raul's district.
Yeah.
He gained that by that, obviously, but the two pockets of Democratic voters that you could count on in Cochise County were gone for that election. So we are doing our best, I think, to reach out. We have a number of people on our network who are from the rural communities, and they're doing their good job of getting the word out about us and what we're trying to do. But it's a tough road to hoe because virtually every county, with the exception of Maricopa, Pima, and Coconino County, they're very conservative and unfortunately more likely to buy into the lie than others. But you have to be out there. And I think, for example, I know Mark Kelly has been all over the state, every part of the state, trying to reach rural voters. And every candidate running for state office has to pay attention, because that could be the difference between a win and a loss if it's in a tight election.
All right, let's turn to Jackie Day. She's got her hand up. Go ahead, Jackie, and unmute yourself.
All right, so I've worked processing the ballots, I've worked in the polls and just about every aspect, but I started the process by being an observer. And if I'm not, I might be mistaken as to the ruling and whether it's just Pima County that are not going to allow observers into the processing of the ballots part of. I think they're going to allow them at the polls. I don't even know about that, but I just wonder if you have any more additional information on that ruling or decision to not allow observers there.
I do know that the county recorder and the elections director here have said that they can't accommodate that. I know there's been some pushback on that, and I don't think it's entirely resolved. I think the Maricopa, or rather the state GOP's lawsuit against Maricopa County is saying that they don't have enough poll workers who are Republicans, and that creates an unfair situation. I am sure that given the fact that there's a 4-member majority on the Board of Supervisors who are Republicans, that is not necessarily true at all and will be resolved. But no, it's really a concern that each party, every main party at least, ought to be able to observe what's going on, not only on polling day, but certainly when the counting is done. But right now, as far as I can tell, there's no movement on Pima County changing that. I think each county handles it differently. And we have a decision here that is not allowing people in.
All right, let's turn to second here. Let's turn to Jeannie Christie. Jeannie, go right ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, Ron, good to see you.
You too, Jeannie.
It's really good to see you. I was wondering, I happened to catch some of an interview with Carrie Lake yesterday, and I'm really wondering how much damage do you think this is going to be to Katie Hobbs, the fact that she's not going to debate her, although I totally understand why she won't. And after watching that, it was a CNN interview, and Dana Bash, oh my God, she really did challenge her and made Carrie look like who she is, but Carrie just talked all the way through, throwing all kinds of accusations at Dana Bash, like you're obsessed with the 2020. I mean, it was ridiculous. I understand why Katie's doing it, but I really think that they're really chewing her up, and Carrie Lake brings it up every chance she gets, that Katie's a coward, she won't debate her. Do you think that this is going to be real damage to Katie?
Well, I think it's already done some damage, and I understand why she's done it, because if you had a chance to see the Republican primary debate between Carrie Lake and the others, whoa, what a zoo that was. I mean, you had Carrie Lake and Robeson calling each other liar, you're a liar, 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 liar. That was the main word used, and it was just outrageous. I mean, it wasn't a debate; it was a pissing contest. We put it bluntly, you know. And it didn't help enlighten anybody, I think, on what their policies were. You know, it was a tough call. And a lot of people have said to me, why did she do it? I said, I think she didn't want to give this woman a platform where she could just go off the rails and just go after her. Would that have been worse than what's happening to Hobbs now? I don't, but I understand why she made the decision. When I ran for office, I always showed up for debates. You got to do that. I think my view is you don't back away from that. We also see that though in CD6 on the other side. You know, Ciscomani has turned down a debate with Engel, and so for whatever reason he doesn't want to be face to face with her. No, it was a hard call. I'm not sure that the wisdom of it will bear out in terms of an election victory. In fact, it does seem to have done some damage to Hobbs.
All right, thank you very much. We've almost run out of time, but we have a couple of questions. So let me turn to Mike Bryan. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Mike, and tell us your question.
Thanks, Larry. So I've been monitoring the chat for questions, and I found no further questions, but I have one of my own. You mentioned that you felt that a sort of cult-like atmosphere amongst election deniers. And I was wondering if the people who you've recruited for your organization, who are religious leaders, have given you any insight on the thinking and possibility of deprogramming these people, not through reasoned argument, but through techniques which we use to pull people out of a cult situation.
Well, the faith leaders that we've talked to, and they are about, as I said, 60 across the state. They include every religious group that we could find, including, as I mentioned, 2 evangelical ministers, which was hard to come up with. No, I think what they have told us is that their congregations are split too. Not necessarily a majority of people who are bought into the lie, but there's enough people in their congregations to know that when they speak out against deniers, that they are themselves sometimes attacked. But mostly, you know, when Bart Smith, who was the pastor at St. Mark's, one of my favorite people in town, when he spoke at our last meeting, he said, you know, the truth is that some people in my congregation, although probably 2 or 3 in his, just don't believe that elections are fair and secure. He said, but you know, we keep pressing on. I'm a leader of my congregation, and my job is to make sure that we stay on track with the truth. And I think the other leaders that we've contacted and have been part of our network now are doing the same thing. They're putting information out in their Sunday or Saturday newsletters or bulletins that they put out for their congregations. They're all in and they're doing their best, but they have not come up with a method any more than I have to pull people out of the cult. It's almost like you got to deprogram people like you do in some of the other cults that are out there.
Okay, Ron, thanks very much. We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to ask Ron to wrap up the meeting and tell us how we can get in touch with him. Andrea's had her hand up for a little bit of time. Go ahead, Andrea, and ask your question. And then I regret to say we'll close questions, although I've put Ron's contact information in the chat. Go right ahead, Andrea.
So this morning on The View, they showed a clip of Carrie Lake saying she'd debate Hobbs anywhere, including on The View. If there's anyone who can keep Carrie Lake's mouth from running away, it's Whoopi Goldberg. Any chance you could suggest this?
I've talked to Katie about her. It's firm. She's not going to debate Carrie Lake anywhere.
I
But-
can't blame her. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, but to reiterate what Larry said, if you're interested in joining the network, send me an email and I'll make sure you get invited to our next meeting. We meet about every month, but now we're going to be meeting every 2 weeks as we get into the last few weeks of the election. We have a meeting coming up on Wednesday morning, and the agenda includes results from our most recent poll. Second one we did. It also has information from the faith leaders for their message that they've developed, and also a representative from Princeton University will talk about the Oath Keepers in Arizona. Now, that's the best address to get to me. This issue, Ronald.Barber@cartercenter.org. Ronald.Barber@cartercenter.org.
All right, Ron, thank you very much. That information is in the chat. So if you have a follow-up question for Ron, you can go ahead and email him. I also put in the link to the Resiliency Network. And Ron, I want to thank you very much for appearing here today at Democrats of Greater Tucson, and also for the incredibly valuable work that you're doing to keep our elections safe and expose the Oath Keepers and just allow democracy to continue.
There's no way I could retire when I was asked to do this work. And my daughters were the people who are looking forward, and my grandkids, to having me around a lot more. And when I talked to them about what I was trying to do, they all agreed. Papa, Dad, you got to do this, because we all have to step up in any way we can to right the wrongs and to push back on lies and misinformation and threats. And that's really what called me to this. And I don't look back in any regrets for having signed on for this. So I thank you very much for the time with you today. Please write me if you have questions, you want to join the network, and help me spread the word about the public meeting on Thursday. We really want a good crowd. We don't want the election deniers to be dominant in that meeting, because it'll be covered by the press, and that would not be good.
All right, Ron, I want to thank you very much for appearing with us today, and we've got your back, and we'll do our best to promote everything you do. And with that, we're out of time, and I need to end this meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. We will see you at Drinking Democratically. So I look forward to seeing everybody in person at that event. And with that, I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you soon.